Welcome back to our video series MMORPG Classes 101, where we're taking a look at the way a class is expressed in various MMORPGs. This includes the essentials like combat, utility, and what style of play the class facilitates. We tie it all together by asking what, if any, aspect of that class should Pantheon, Rise of the Fallen, the upcoming MMORPG by Visionary Realms, consider when designing the class. Of course, it's a subjective perspective and in no way a definitive guide. Rather, it's just my review of the experience with the class and the game in question. My name is Therek, Scholar of the Bow, and this is my take on the Scout class of Dark Age of Camelot.
The most important lesson is it's not a rogue if it doesn't use daggers.
Remember, wizards, when it comes to fireballs, size does matter.
Alright class, settle down. It's time to learn to die like a ranger.
Jimmy, get the glue out of your mouth. Today we're going to be talking about the eternal honor of the Paladin.
Attention class, please be seated.
For this one, our group played on the Phoenix server, an emulated, private Dark Age of Camelot server that provides a more classic DAOC experience. We had a static group that consisted of myself on the Scout class, a wizard, infiltrator, paladin, and a couple healers to round out the group. We played once per week for about 2 hours over the course of a month and got to about level 30. If you're familiar with DAOC, you've already figured out that our group played in the Albion realm for this series. DAOC does something pretty unique amongst MMOs in that there are 3 different versions of the same archetype for the 3 different realms: Albion, Hibernia, and Midgard. So here's the official description of the Albion realm's Scout class in DAOC. Quote, the Archer class of Albion, Scouts can use the famed English longbow to damage their enemies from long range, as well as use their shields and some melee weapons, end quote. The other realms have their Archer classes, with Hibernia having a true Ranger class, and Midgard having a Hunter class. I feel like a true education in the class should include these, so whenever I say Ranger in this review, just take into account that those versions may include some of the things that I wasn't aware of. And because I'm a DAOC noob, I wasn't aware of this going in, so I might have played an Al, but in my heart, I think I'm actually a Hib with their awesome Elven Ranger class. Betraying my own people? Sure. But hey, at least I'm not a mid, because as mine is said...
Oh yeah, well how about this on stream? Mid sucks.
Oh, you done it. You done it. We're in trouble next week when we go to Thid. We're in trouble.
Sometimes a class is defined primarily by its context, and Dark Age of Camelot's context is pretty novel for the time. It was one of the few MMOs that really took the PvP concept and extended it to realm v realm combat. With DAOC's additional layers of gameplay, it's worth questioning how much thought went into designing the classes to function well in those aspects. We could get into a whole discussion about how PvE and PvP are fundamentally different games, but for the purposes of this video, I'll try to factor that into my grading and analysis. So let's get into the specific elements of DAOC's Scout class. Building your character in DAOC, in my case, a Scout, means allocating skill points attained by leveling. For the Scout class, I could put points into stealth, slashing weapons, shields, archery, and thrusting weapons. So you can really craft a class as you see fit in this game, which is pretty cool. You also get realm abilities, which give further customization. Through 30 levels, I only had 3 points to spend, so I put 1 into Master of Archery, which increases your archery speed by a percentage, and 2 into Falcon's Eye, which increases the chance of scoring a critical hit by a percentage. But for your main ability points, as you put points in, new abilities open up. Or that's the idea anyway. As a wannabe ranger, I dumped as many points as I could into archery, and whatever was left went into slashing melee weapons. I received many new skills in the slashing combat, but unfortunately the only archery skill I was offered through 30 levels was critical shot. So I had this great big damage arrow shot at the end of the day, but that was the only ranged skill I had. Why is it the only ranged ability? I get the aspect of having one super powerful bow shot, but I don't know, it seems kind of boring. Even if it's supposed to be a very traditional archer in line with Albion's setting, what about a double arrow type skill, or maybe a flaming arrow? I mean, those were real things. The realistic, or simulation argument, is reinforced by DAOC's ridiculous bow draw and release speed. They weren't kidding when they said the Scout description is about the famous English longbow. Seriously, it became a running joke in our group that when I would try to pull mobs, everyone could go get a drink while waiting for me to release an arrow. Here's a list of the top 5 things you can do while waiting for a bow to fire as a scout in DAOC. Number 5, do your taxes. Number 4, start an angry Reddit thread. Number 3, play with your dog. Number 2, invent the next cryptocurrency. And number 1, write your memoirs. What I will say about the lone ranged ability is that it does hit as hard as it should. I could usually get 2 shots off before the mob got to me when I was soloing, and they would be at least a third of their health down by the time they were in range for melee. In our group, I tried to stay at range as much as possible, but with the big damage comes big mob aggression, so I didn't want to overburden the healers. I think I may have fallen asleep at my desk if I had not moved into melee range during extended fights. Fortunately, the melee itself is interesting. DAOC uses a sequence of abilities, with some as openers and others as follow-ups. And it's not like it's the recommended sequence, no, it's actually required. So for example, you can only use Bloodletter if you've successfully used Uppercut as an opener. And by level 30, I had a lot of these types of linked melee skills. It's a good idea, and it kind of works, I would say. The issue I had was watching either my character's animation or the combat log very closely to see if the opener landed, and that really took away from me enjoying the combat. I think if I played longer, I would have gotten more comfortable with the system, and I think it's a mechanic that makes sense from a challenge standpoint, but in the short term, it's just really hard to accommodate. Not something I would want to remove, maybe just tweak somehow. As a ranger, having chained, flowing, dual-wielding attacks is part of what I enjoy. But where is dual wield anyway? I got to level 30 and it wasn't a skill I could acquire. Now, I know the Hibernian Ranger gets it, but could the Scout not eventually get it at least? And a Ranger with a shield? I mean, kind of blasphemy if you ask me. Even the realistic argument doesn't really hold water here. I'm no scholar of the Middle Ages, but I'm pretty sure if there were Rangers, they were all about bows and blades. None of these bucklers and such. The DAOC Scout is definitely not the agile dodging type, leaning more into the hardy strongbow type. I guess pulling that bowstring back so slowly has really bulked these Rangers up. One aspect I love about DAOC's ranged combat is the different arrow types. When I first went to purchase arrows, I was taken aback by the amount of variations available. Now, from what I understand, the primary differences are trade-offs between range, damage type, accuracy, and overall damage. The different arrow types is a feature that way more games should do. It's a great way of customizing your loadout and increasing your versatility. Accordingly, you get a dedicated 4-slot quiver that isn't part of your main inventory. This is another thing that more MMOs, and really any game with a ranged class, should do. Why do Rangers have to suffer for bag space when it's something we have to have? We'll come back to this later. Now, in all honesty, I can't say I felt the difference of the arrows in the gameplay, but I'm sure there are scenarios where experienced DAOC players utilize them to great effect. So the combat grade I'm giving here applies solely to the DAOC Scout class. I joked around about the draw speed, but I kind of came to appreciate it over time. It's kind of like 2 combat styles jammed together. It's an archery simulator and a stout fighter. Neither are perfect, but they're still very enjoyable, so I'm going to give the combat a B+. The utility of a scout in DAOC is pretty limited. Maybe it's just a different kind of utility than we think of in other MMOs, where a ranger can use tracking, pets, or offer something else to the group. I know the Hibernian Ranger and Midgard Hunter likely provide greater utility as well, but I think for DAOC this is where we really need to consider the PvP aspect. Now, although we didn't focus on that side, in discussion it was said that stealth archers are absolute nightmares for enemy casters. And I kind of like the idea of Rangers as the mage killer class. Sorry about that, Draq. Now, I didn't put any points into stealth for my Ranger, but I'm not opposed to a stealth-based build, as I think increased damage from cover is one of the foundations of being a Ranger. In fact, I like the idea of stealth as a combat tool over a utility tool, which is what DAOC seems to embrace. Stealth for utility, like scouting ahead, is the realm of rogues. My scout was not much of a scout. Judging by the number of times I was killed in PvP by stealthed players, I think it's safe to say stealth is primarily a powerful combat tool in this game. On that note, while we primarily did PvE, we did attempt PvP one night, and let's just say we weren't on the winning side. Admittedly, I'm not a huge fan of PvP in MMOs, but I can appreciate the good feelings that dominating another realm has. I did play a bit of World v World in Guild Wars 2 back in the day, so running with a horde of players can be entertaining. The final thing I'll say about utility for the Scout in DAOC is that they can be a group puller, right? Well, in theory, yes. In practice, let's just say it might be a slow night for XP if I was the group's puller. Nobody was into waiting around for my shot to fire off when it was just more efficient to have the tank run in and grab the mobs. Something I forgot to mention earlier is that DAOC does one of the most annoying things that only makes the slow bow issue more frustrating. If the mob moves out of range while I'm powering up my mega bow, then it just doesn't fire. You have to move back into range and start all over. If I was the puller for the group, I'd want to be at maximum range to get the most damage in, but if you do this, it's almost a certainty that the mob is going to leisurely wander just out of range. Hold on guys, let me reload. So for utility, I give the Scout class of DAOC an I for incomplete. I feel like without the PvP play, I can't really grade this aspect with confidence. DAOC has that classic style of play where you're camping a spot for a while or doing a good old dungeon crawl. It's a slower paced game with some of the tougher fights lasting several minutes. One of my common complaints in this series is that combat's too fast to use your skills in a meaningful way. DAOC does this right, and you can make use of nearly all your skills if you want to. When it comes to the Scout's pace, I think this grade sort of speaks for itself based on what I've said already. Fine in melee, but like molasses in winter while at range. If there were more ranged abilities, I could support the uber slow pace as I could at least mix it up a little. Our group was able to keep a brisk pace with pulls, so it wasn't like there was a lot of downtime, but we had to stay on our toes to prevent a wipe as well. And while we're here, can I just ask, why is the run speed in DAOC such a thing? My god, without a hastener to buff you and your sprint ability, I felt like I was walking in sand all the time. If I didn't know better, you'd think this was a modern MMO that wanted to sell some speed buffs, haste gear, or mounts in the cash shop. But no, it's just part of the realism, I guess. Of course, it isn't just a ranger issue, this is an everyone problem, but still, rangers should be swift, fleet of foot, or at least not run like they're carrying a pocket full of nickels. So for pace of play, I give the Scout class a C+. I just needed a few more things to do while killing mobs. Fortunately, we were able to dull that monotony with a healthy flow of targets and good conversation. Now, I'm going to give DAOC some credit when it comes to identity alignment. It's a game that has roots in reality in terms of its settings. With the Albion Realm's deference to Arthurian times and classes based on real professions from that era, it strikes a consistent tone when it comes to class identity. Yes, I realize there is no real wizards from days of yore, but the ranger is at least more akin to a soldier. While Legolas may be the dream, Therek the Briton is probably more accurate. This part of the analysis, I always tend to compare the class against what I think is the ideal ranger. Again, PvP factors into the equation for this game, so I can't really do that this time. Who the enemy is plays into identity. A PvP ranger identity makes me think of infantry snipers in the high tower, or the faceless bowman atop the ramparts of a castle. Not the woodland warrior I typically picture. So from that standpoint, again, based on what I've been told rather than what I experienced, I think the DAOC ranger is pretty close. Is it my preference? No, but it's definitely legit, and for that it has my respect. DAOC really tried to go hard down the class identity road as a game overall, and I think it succeeds. 3 realms, multiple unique races and classes for each realm, I mean, what more could you really want? How distinct all the races and classes are, I don't know, but on principle, I'm giving DAOC's Scout class an A+ for identity. The Pantheon Ranger is kind of coming from a much different place than the DAOC Ranger. In Pantheon, the Ranger uses momentum, which is generated by weaving in and out of melee and ranged combat to power its abilities. Or at least last we heard, since VR has said they are reworking this mechanic a little while ago. The DAOC Scout might be the least mobile ranger I've ever played. Yes, there are some slashing abilities that need to start from the side, but it certainly doesn't benefit from being actively mobile in combat. What I would incorporate is what I mentioned earlier, the variety of arrow types and the built-in quiver. Now, I don't know if Pantheon's doing this or not, to be fair, but it's something I'd love to see. The other thing I think Pantheon can learn from DAOC is what it means to be true to your vision. DAOC seems like a game that was proud of what it was and didn't make concessions even if it resulted in some awkward gameplay. It's important to me that games have confidence in what they're trying to do, and I think DAOC is a good example of this. I'm glad we played on the Phoenix server for a more classic experience where leveling took a little longer and there still existed some of the original blemishes. I think Pantheon should take heed of the demand for classic versions of MMOs these days, and remember that capitulating to convenience comes at a steep cost. For these reasons, my overall grade for DAOC's Scout class is an A. I was skeptical when we first started playing, but this game grew on me. The Scout class was certainly interesting. There's depth to DAOC without the pointless, messy layers of systems we see in modern MMOs that passes for depth today. I had fun playing this game with my friends. Now, if you'll excuse me, I've gathered intel on Albion, and I have to heed my true calling and join my Hibernian brothers and sisters as an Elven Ranger.